On that note, let's bring in the State Democratic Party Chairman, Delegate Mike Pushkin. Mike, good morning. Thank you for being with us again.
Good morning, and thanks for having me on. I was just thinking what I was doing when during John Doyle's freshman year in the House of Delegates, and I believe I was studying for my bar mitzvah in 1983.
Okay. You passed, I take it.
You passed.
Yeah, I passed.
In 1983, I was studying how to get my next beer and what girl I like better at Duquesne University.
There you go.
That was probably a good pursuit. Mike, your reaction to the governor's speech last night, and I'll start first with your thoughts on his declaration of it's time to repeal Certificate of Need in its entirety.
Well, I think he spent a lot of time talking about Certificate of Need, and let's be honest, I'd say it's an issue that most West Virginians really aren't talking about around the kitchen table. Most people don't understand it. I think that John Doyle, who was there when it was created, has a good understanding of it. And I do think that our state, it's hard to compare our state to other states. We have so many bordering states, and we have some of the biggest problems compared to all those bordering states. I don't think that all-out repeal of Certificate of Need is going to have the desired effect that they're claiming it will. As they say, with the governor and groups like Americans for Prosperity and the Cardinal Institute that are really pushing this, it's not going to make healthcare more affordable until you really rein in the big insurance companies and big pharma. Or you're not going to be able to address the skyrocketing cost of health care. However, I don't have faith that Governor Morrissey is going to go after big pharma since he spent most of his adult life working for them. So that's an issue. But they're saying that this is going to somehow bring down prices and hospitals are going to spring up down in the southern coal fields. That's just not going to happen. The free market does not exist in healthcare.
That's a fair point, and it was brought out by Steve Roberts in our last segment too, that if you do repeal Certificate of Need in West Virginia, and the border states around us have Certificate of Need, it puts the healthcare facilities in West Virginia at a disadvantage because they can't go across the border to make up that market loss if you allow other places inside the border.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting
And I'm
point.
not sure which states do. I don't think it's going to have all the horrible effects that the Hospital Association is saying that it'll have if you repeal it, but I also don't believe it's going to make healthcare facilities spring up in parts of West Virginia that really need it. If anything, if it's just driven by the free market, you're going to see places like the Eastern Panhandle, North Central West Virginia, down here where I live in Charleston, where we have better access to health care than most of the state. That's where the facilities are going to be aimed at, where the population is, and it's still going to leave the people who really need served in rural areas, left out. And then my concern is if these out-of-state companies are coming in and they find that it's not profitable and they leave, but we've already driven our in-state hospitals out of business through this, then everybody's going to be left out. And I'm concerned about affordability and access, and I don't believe a straight-up repeal would improve that. And thinking in the long run, it would harm that.
Doreen Brumbaugh-Schaffner, who is Delegate Mike Height's mom, by the way, says, owner of a business that went through the Certificate of Need process, I actually am not opposed to the elimination of it, but do wonder how all of us will manage to acquire sufficient staff with the low state reimbursement rate. Mike, does that sound like a legit concern?
Yeah, that needs to be addressed. We need to address the reimbursement rates. Especially in the realm of providers for the folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. We aren't able to pay the workers, the in-home workers, enough to keep people in that very important job. that's something we've been talking about for a long time, and they haven't been able to raise them. They've raised them slightly, but not nearly enough to be competitive with other states, and there's other areas of healthcare that are the same. I think that just by talking about repealing certificate of need, I think there was a lot of things that were really oversimplified, and that's an understatement, and Governor Morrissey's address last night, and that was a big part of it, simply saying that that's going to solve all of our healthcare problems by repealing this. It's not. And there was questioning the other day of a woman, I believe she's from the Eastern Panhandle, from the Cardinal Institute, during the Joint Committee on Health during interims, right prior to the session starting, and she was talking about problems that with women who are pregnant, who are looking to, and we heard the story last night from the governor. Even somebody had to, up in the Eastern Panhandle, had to go into Virginia to give birth to their baby. And I understand that we lifted the requirement for certificate of need on birthing centers. They don't require a certificate of need. I know that's different from a hospital, but we did. But what happened? They didn't just spring up all over the place. It didn't have the desired effect, is what I'm getting at. And then when I asked the woman from the Cardinal Center about this, she said, "Well, there's a whole lot of other other factors involved with that. Licensure." And it's like, yeah, of course there is. That's why this isn't the cure-all, just repealing the need. And I say, in the long run, it could have a way more harmful effect than we may realize.
I think that was Jessica Dobrinsky from the Cardinal Institute.
Correct,
She's
correct.
a Jefferson High School graduate.
Sorry, I forgot her name.
Yep.
That's right.
Rob, John, and Mike, I think it's Mike, you asked what other states have certificate of need. I know Maryland does because they passed it the same year we did in 1983. The rest, I don't know. Now, Steve Roberts, when he was on, seemed to think that both Virginia and Ohio also have certificate of need. Now, I'm wondering if Virginia has certificate of need, then why would Senator Rucker have had to? Why would her daughter or daughter-in-law, I think it was, have to go 100, an hour in or more into Virginia to have her baby? If Virginia has certificate of need too, then that wouldn't be a difference. I'm just kind of confused by all this.
Well, I think because there, like was stated by Ms. Dobrinsky, there are other factors involved. Okay. Mainly, what's coming to mind for me is some of the workforce challenges that we have here in West Virginia, and repealing certificate of need does not have any effect on that. We still have to have people to work there. So we have a whole lot of challenges facing this state. Unfortunately, the governor didn't really get into great detail about those challenges, especially towards the end of the speech, where he just went off on red meat and just the divisive campaign rhetoric that we're used to hearing from D.C. Last night we got to hear it from the from the speaker's podium of the House of Delegates, but it was very short on specifics and details, and just a lot of political red meat overall on this. But one thing I really want to talk about in the state of the state, and right at the beginning, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this too, John Doyle. We have a couple Johns in there. Pat,
yeah, we do.
You Deputy Secretary of Revenue, I'm sure you gave us some insight on this as well. But when he came in and basically threw the Republican majority under the bus,
yes,
who had been there for a while, and saying, "Hey, you guys have been telling us for years we had this surplus. Well, we don't have a surplus. It's all artificial," something the Democrats have been pointing out for years. It's all artificial because it's the rainy day fund and one-time money, and we're staring down a $400 million deficit. And our most recent governor, the outgoing governor, who's now our U.S. Senator, Jim Justice, is still saying that he left the state in great shape, and we have this $2 billion surplus. So one is saying we have a $2 billion surplus. And our new governor is saying we're looking at a $400 million deficit. Well, both of those things can't be true. Both of these men cannot be telling the truth. I will say they both could be wrong, and I think that's more likely, is that neither of them are really telling the truth.
Well, okay.
Neither of those things are true. It's somewhere in between.
Well, they can be true, though, Mike, because if you have a $2 billion rainy day fund plus including the
That's
excess.
Not what's in the rainy day.
No, it's 1.3, but there's another $400 million set aside from the revenue set aside for the income tax cut. But then if you have a $400 million operating loss in your annual budget, the two can be true. You might have a $1.7 billion set aside, but you need $400 million in your everyday operating funds. It's like having money in your savings account, but not making enough money every week to pay your bills.
It's a cash flow problem versus a bank account problem is the way I see it. Hey, Mike, I have a question for you regarding the deficit. And let's just assume that the numbers I'm going to use here are right, because that's not really what it's about. But according to...
Well, that's what we've had to do for years.
Okay, I teed that up for you. Congratulations.
Some of us have been saying for a while, that ain't quite right. And now we're getting agreement from the incoming governor that, we're in trouble. But go ahead. We'll assume it's right.
So according to the news report I'm reading here, the highest figure of the $400 million deficit is $153 million shortfall on the state's share of Medicaid spending. Again, the absolute value of the numbers is not important. Translate that for me. What does that mean has happened?
Well, I can tell you it is a concern for me that's what is most likely to be on the chopping block.
But what is it? What is a share? I mean, how does one? I mean,
how do you have a $153 million shortfall in Medicaid spending? Is the question.
Is it money we didn't get,
if you've been borrowing money out of it? I guess I'd be interested to hear Doyle's perspective on that. But as somebody who served on the finance committee before, it was the vice chair of finance and the deputy secretary of revenue. I believe that they've been using that fund to backfill other agencies.
That is correct, Mike. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to do that. We did it when I was deputy secretary and when I was vice chair of finance, because what you do is you take money out of the Medicaid fund to pay for things, knowing there's money coming into the Medicaid fund. And again, as John Gilstrap pointed out, it's an accounting problem.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway. That's where I think this comes from. So you can say, yes, there's a deficit, yes, there isn't, and that sort of thing. I want to go back to a question you asked me about was then Governor Justice right, or is Morrissey right? I think Morrissey's right about the $400 billion shortfall. Because I remember during the 3.5 years I was Deputy Secretary of Revenue, Bob Kiss, who was my boss, the late Bob Kiss, and I were talking, and he kept saying, we have a structural deficit in the budget, and it has not been fixed in 10 years. We've just been patching here and patching there and not dealing with the long-term problem. And I was very happy to hear Patrick Morrissey essentially say the same thing last night, that it is a long-term structural problem that has to be dealt with in some way. Now, I'm not sure I would agree with how Governor Morrissey would propose to patch it. There are a number of different ways you can do that. But I do think he's right about that, and I do think we have a governor now that's going to tell us the truth as he sees it. That is not what we've had in the last 8 years.
What is a structural deficit in the budget?
The fact that under your tax structure, given the economy, you're not taking in as much money as you have budgeted to spend overall.
That's a very simple explanation.
And you talked earlier about why this Medicaid shortfall, because it seems to be the fund that they are constantly taking money out of to backfill other things. And I just wanted to point out that when you do that, it's even more costly, because it's a 3-to-1 payback from the federal government. So when you're spending it elsewhere, you're not getting that value for it. So you're spending really 3 times as much as what you're taking out. Is that correct, John?
No, not necessarily. If you put it back in. If you use future tax receipts over the coming year to put it back in before the federal deadline, the feds allow you to play with money a little bit there.
Do the feds give you a block of money and you're expected to match it on a 1 to 3 basis, or do you spend the money and get $3 back for every dollar you spent later?
Back.
Yeah, you get it back. You get it
So
back.
that's why it's more. When you're using that fund, you're costing the state money.
So
and it leads to even greater shortfall. The point that I got out of it too is like from the right off the bat coming out saying, look, we're staring down this $400 million deficit and we continue to be last in everything. It's a very different message from what Jim Justice said at his farewell address, with the great shape that he was leaving the state in. But it is true. We're still last in everything that we want to be first in, and we're first in everything we want to be last in. But what I didn't hear last night were any real great details on what we're going to do about it. I mean, there was talk about, one-stop shop for business. That's great. Talking about a dashboard, we already do that. About a job portal, we already do that. And then when it came to issues like, the drug epidemic, he just did some more national DC-style rhetoric about the border. Well, we've had a drug problem for quite some time in this country, and especially here in this state. It didn't just occur over the last 4 years. So it has very little to do with what he talked about. He's very short on specifics. And in fact, we're looking at the budget now, and the one program that we had under Governor Justice that was working and putting people back to work and dealing with people who were coming back from getting out of prison, who were in recovery and trying to find them employment, the Jobs and Hope program, something that Jim Justice did that actually worked. It's not in the budget. It's not in Patrick Morrissey's budget. So he wants to talk about the border, but with actual things inside of West Virginia that's actually helping people, he's planning on cutting.
Wouldn't that be opposite of his desire to get more workforce participation because the West Virginia workforce participation rate is so abysmal?
One would think. I don't know why it's not in the budget, but fortunately we have a legislature that's an equal branch of government. Hopefully we can put it back in.
If I could throw a thought in here about that, I heard him talk about that lack of workforce participation last night. I've talked to a number of folks around here who have said to me, we need to be more attractive to retirees. First of all, we got just about the oldest population in the country. We are already very attractive to retirees. That's part of the problem. When you have more old people, that's when you have low workforce participation. I mean, the mere fact that someone is a retiree means that person is not participating in the workforce. So we need to, when we talk about these things, we need to understand the interrelationships and come up with something that's going to help the economy work better than it is.
I think that simplifies it. If you talk to any business person around here, they will tell you how hard it is, whether it's finding wait staff or it's finding clerk at the counter or whatever,
or somebody who can pass a drug screen.
So, there's that. But how difficult it is to get people to look for a job and then to accept a job. Now, I've always said that money is part of it. If you want to pay a McDonald's worker $65,000 a year, you will have absolute full staff all the time.
You're right.
But obviously you can't do that. So there is a balance here of its salary and benefits and drug addiction and everything else. I don't think you can hang it on just retirees.
No, it's not just that. I'm just saying it's interrelated. The two discussions are interrelated. If you're going to get more retirees, then the statistics are going to show that your workforce participation rate is lower.
And that's what we have now. I mean, it's just a fact that if we look at the demographics of West Virginia, we're an old state. A lot of young people leave here, and a lot of young people are not moving here. So I've said all along, everything we do at the legislature should be run through the prism of, will this attract young people to this state? Will this make the state more attractive for young people to stay in? And we're not doing that now. People are leaving here in droves, and we're one of two states that's actually losing population. We have no future if we're not attracting young people to this state, and that is driving our workforce participation rates, which are the lowest in the country.
Mike, what is the latest on the House of Delegates' 91st seat?
Well, we are waiting to hear back from the Supreme Court with the scheduling order, when hopefully they will hear the case in the near future, so we can have certainty and get some resolution to this problem that really I think was made a lot worse with this House Resolution 4 that happened on day 0 of the session. And to me, that's the part that really needs to be addressed. And I think John would agree with me that it sets a very dangerous precedent when a simple majority in the House of Delegates can just pass a resolution to overturn an election. That's not the process. The process is expulsion. That requires some due process. It requires more than a majority vote. They didn't do that because in doing that, they would have admitted that the seat would go to the party of the office holder prior to the vacancy, which is the Democratic Party. And because of that, they wanted to skirt the law. They wanted to ignore their own laws and create this phony resolution that there's no precedent for at all. And in fact, if it holds, creates a very dangerous precedent. And maybe it won't be in such an extreme type situation. It could be in the future where whichever party would be in the majority could just say they didn't like the outcome of an election, so we can pass this type of resolution to just create a vacancy. So we just want, like I've said it before, we just want the majority to follow the law. Those who make the laws should be required to follow them.
Go ahead, John Doyle.
Speaking of House resolutions, H.R. 1. Which I watched with much interest on Wednesday when you all gavelled in at noon, and that's the one that makes some major changes in the committee structure, which I will tell you I like the changes in the committee structure, but at the same time does away with the long-standing rule in the House that anyone can demand a public hearing on a bill if they submit a request to the clerk's office. And
30 seconds.
So, Mike, just elaborate on that if you would.
But elaborate in 30 seconds because I'm out of time.
Major changes, I'll talk real quick. Major changes to the rules, and you're right, and it creates lack of public input. You would have to know ahead of time in order to get down to the committee to testify. Of course, if you live up where you live, good luck, because we don't know what's on the committee agenda until right before the committee gavels in. So you're never going to know. Of course, you could send an email, but you could always send an email. You could do that before, but they got rid of the public input. They wouldn't vote. They wouldn't allow us to have cameras in the committee rooms.
10 seconds.
They even have a rule about the press not being able to go to the bathroom. And I would just say generally, when somebody seems like they're trying to
Time is up.
Acting like they have something to hide, it's because they do have something to hide.
On that note, I got to go. Mike Pushkin, thank you. This is Talk Radio, WRNR Martinsburg.